America's mental health experts are causing more harm than good. Donald Trump just got his fourth indictment in 5 months. The world is calling on Joe Biden to declare a, quote, climate emergency. We've got the latest polls from the election and more, all here on the first ever episode of The Great Awakening with Coach Duke Lowry.
15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
90 miles an hour is the speed I drive.
Live from Nashville, Tennessee, it's Coach Duke Lowry.
Dropping back the throttle and I turn on a dime. 'Cause the stranger's back.
Namaste, weirdos. Good to be back with you after such a long time. I'm your host, Coach Duke Lowry. You know, as the American dream continues to crumble, our so-called expert class is doubling down on the supposed cures that got us here in the first place. $900 billion in new spending will, quote, reduce inflation, they say. Diversity is our strength. Funding Ukraine is our number one priority. You need an ineffective booster shot every 6 months in perpetuity to protect you from a virus that kills 0.6% of those who get it. We've heard this all before, and we're no better for listening. Take gun crime, for example. Now, those in favor of further regulating firearms often talk about the supposed increase in mass shootings. They cite statistics on the number of guns in the country versus the number of people, or the perceived rise in incidents. Much of this, however, is driven by around-the-clock media coverage and disingenuous legal definitions of what constitutes a, quote, mass shooting. Gun rights advocates then push back, claiming the real issue isn't the prevalence of guns, which is a right guaranteed by the Constitution, but rather the result of a national mental health crisis. And they're not wrong. Americans have always owned a disproportionate amount of guns relative to our population. Yet never before have we experienced the number of mass shootings we've seen in the last 3 decades. Regardless of your stance on the gun debate, voices on all sides agree that America's mental health is deteriorating. And worse, the experts all agree on the solution. In the aftermath of COVID-19 and the totally unnecessary, though feverishly enforced lockdowns, we've heard endless stories about mentally disturbed individuals wreaking havoc on our streets. We watch videos of people freaking out on airplanes and subway cars. A visit to any public library will allow you to witness this crisis firsthand. You'll likely find a handful of homeless people either talking to themselves or babbling incoherently into their government-issued Obama phones. Road rage also appears to be on the rise, as are instances of erratic and lawless driving. And the solution, our experts tell us, is therapy. Now, in an increasingly narcissistic society, one where everyone believes their mediocre life is worthy of online broadcast, we've come to glorify the insipidly average. Social media influencers are revered for their lackluster intellect, self-absorbed online rants, and their skimpy clothing. Perhaps more than any time in history, platforms like TikTok have reduced a woman's net worth to her mere physical attractiveness. Many of these people are famous only because of the firmness and shape of their bodies. Often that's the extent of their talents. When gravity and caloric intake finally take their toll, and they will, their career will meet a sad and abrupt demise. Yet these are the, quote, celebrities our young people have been taught to idolize and to emulate. Fame is the new currency. And seen as only a small percentage of attractive models, truly great singers, or performers ever break through to the mainstream, America now finds herself filled with an overstimulated population of wannabe internet stars. People from sea to shining sea desperately wishing to be famous for nothing more than shaking their ass. And the solution to their inability to launch a successful personal brand and the subsequent misery that this causes is therapy. Because nothing is more beneficial to a self-absorbed underachiever than to have someone listen and nod while they spend an hour complaining about their first world problems. I'm working on me, they post online, as they cry on a Zoom call to a shrink that they have to pay to appear interested. You know, you have to feel for some of these therapists. Empathy fatigue is a real thing, especially when you're listening to a privileged brat with a six-figure income bitching about the difficulties of their lives. Yet in actuality, they're not working on themselves at all. They're talking about themselves, and there's a big difference. In fact, this is the last thing many of them need to do. We already talk and think about ourselves constantly. Perhaps, just maybe, if the modern American quit thinking about themselves so much and started thinking about others, we'd be happier. The problem is, selflessness doesn't draw social media followers. Now, in most cases, therapy is stupid. More Americans are in therapy now than ever before, and at the same time, more Americans are reporting mental health issues than at any time in our history. That's because therapy isn't the solution to what ails us. All it does is stroke our already inflated egos. It feeds our narcissistic tendencies and further solidifies the notion that the world revolves around us. I mean, take it from me. I've tried it before, and I found it a total waste of time and money. In all actuality, it was counterproductive. And then there's, quote, disorders like ADD and ADHD, which as far as I'm concerned are not real conditions. At the very least, they are grossly overdiagnosed, and the vast majority of children being treated for such, quote, disorders are actually being harmed. Children and teenagers are not supposed to be captivated by a teacher explaining the wonders of chlorophyll or long division. They are naturally fidgety and rambunctious creatures. Our experts, however, would disagree. Their solution is to put your child on speed, be it Adderall, Ritalin, or some similar drug, so their pupils dilate and they fall into a quasi-hypnotic state, silently mesmerized by the useless information they're meant to receive. Of course, this may be good for their grades, but it is horribly detrimental to the development of a personality and critical thinking skills. Besides, there is something to be said about teaching an uninterested, squirmy child how to behave responsibly in public despite their boredom. That actually furthers maturity. Drugging them, however, only prolongs adolescence and turns them into addicts. Now, speaking of addicts, perhaps no area of treatment in America is as deficient and in need of reform than that of addiction. Studies show that as many as 80% of those who attend 12-step programs such as Alcoholics Anonymous end up dropping out. Of the 10 or 20% who remain, only a tiny fraction, some estimate the number to be as low as 5%, achieve anything resembling lifelong sobriety. Yet according to our experts, the 12-step programs remain the most tried and tested path to recovery. This, however, is based on flawed logic. Of course, there are people who have found success by attending 12-step meetings. I know some. But they are sadly the exception and not the norm. Most people I know who have broken free from an addiction did it the old-fashioned way. They did it on their own. Every addict recognizes the negative impact of their destructive habits. They know it long before entering treatment, and they understand it better than anyone. At some point, whether in a program or not, they eventually have enough of the carnage and they just walk away from their addictions. The key, therefore, lies in understanding what their addiction is doing to them and where it will lead if they continue using. They then must learn to recognize the destructive voices within that, despite their better judgment, drive them to act out. Addiction works a lot like the proverbial devil on your shoulder. It reasons with you in your own voice, whispering in your ear. Yet despite the grandiose failure rate of the 12-step programs, they continue to be the standard treatment mandated by state courts for those convicted of drug and alcohol-related crimes, in some cases even for marijuana possession. And like the children diagnosed with ADHD, when the poor addict arrives at their court-appointed meeting, they find a congregation of misers proudly declaring themselves, quote, powerless over their actions. Relapse is a normal part of recovery, they say. You have to take it one day at a time. Now, to anyone forced into such a gathering, this naturally sounds insane. The addict knows, again, better than anyone, that they are not powerless individuals. They worked hard to become addicted, and if they're going to quit, it's on them to do so, not some group, and certainly not some subjective higher power. Think about it. What is one day at a time other than a lifelong sentence? It is a ball and chain meant to drag behind your ankle until death do you part. In actuality, 12-step programs are not the solution. In fact, they actually amplify the voice of addiction. They tell you that you're powerless. It's a chronic disease. You'll have to suffer with this the rest of your life. Relapse is normal, so it's okay to drink or use drugs whenever you bloody well feel like it. But you're not powerless. If it's a disease, then please explain to me how you contracted it. No, self-destructive behavior is not okay, and you know it. You got yourself into this mess, and you're the only person who can get yourself out. I mean, can you imagine anything more torturous than living, quote, one day at a time with an addiction? Always thinking about it and dwelling over it and waiting on your next relapse. Or worse, the white knuckling you'll have to suffer through for hours, if not days, before finally giving in. Yet this is precisely what the so-called experts recommend. You know, ask any self-respecting addict. They'll tell you, if that's what the rest of my life is going to look like, I'd rather just drink or use drugs. And they're not wrong. It's a totally rational decision. So if these are the best prescriptions our expert class can come up with when it comes to matters of mental health, drugging children, 12-step programs, then maybe it's time we stop listening to them. All right, folks, welcome again to the first ever episode of the Great Awakening with Coach Duke Lowry. So great to have you here. A quick rundown of the polls on the Republican side, the Republican nomination, the Real Clear Politics polling average. We got Donald Trump at like 54%, and number 2, Ron DeSantis, 14.8%. Vivek Ramaswamy, who I'm actually quite the fan of, 6.4%, and surprisingly, Mike Pence coming in fourth here with 5.3%. On the Democratic nomination side, no surprise here. Biden at 63.7%, even though most of his voters don't even know there's a primary going on. And my boy coming up here in second, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with 13.4%. Now, in the last few weeks, I've seen a lot of stories, and I kind of wanted to bring this up front and center here because, in the last election we had the COVID crisis, and of course everyone had to mail their ballots in and be sent a ballot by mail because, it was so deadly, killing 0.6% of those who got it, that we can't trust Americans to go to the polls for themselves. No. So, there's always the October surprise or the next emergency, and of course, the initial, attempt to meddle in the election is the Trump indictments. And let's talk about that first. So just look at this as objectively as you can. Whether you love Trump, whether you hate Trump, whether you're indifferent, doesn't matter. Joe Biden has been president for 3 years. Donald Trump has been out of office in all that time. He had both houses of Congress for 2 years. He appointed the Attorney General. If Trump was such a criminal, if 4 indictments in 5 months, why didn't you indict? And if you care about justice, why didn't you indict him in the first 2 years? Like just get this out of the way. Like swift justice. Let's. Trump is a criminal. Let's get him behind bars now. But they didn't do that. They waited until 3.5 years into Joe Biden's presidency, once all this stuff is coming out with Hunter, his son. And in the last 5 months, 4 indictments and 91 charges against the former president, Donald Trump. Now, I don't know how you see this. Maybe you're happy about this. Maybe you're pissed off about it. But this looks a lot like, at the very least, it looks very Banana Republic to me. In these sort of developing countries where whoever's in power at the time indicts their political opponents, very similar to what's going on in Pakistan right now. But beyond that, if he is such a criminal, why didn't we roll these 4 indictments out over the last 3.5 years? Why do you wait until right now to where all these cases are going to be going to trial as he is running for president? And not just as he's running for president. I get a little conspiratorial here because the Democrats now see that Donald Trump essentially has a lock. I mean, we just gave you the poll numbers. 54% to DeSantis is like 18 or whatever it was. Like, he's got a lock. He's going to be all Trump country on the Republican side when it comes to the primaries. So he's got that on lock, and then he's got to go to court for 91 charges and 4 indictments in the last 5 months. And all these court cases are going to be dragging through probably past the election next November. Why did you wait so long? Because they wanted him to be the nominee, and they know the Republicans are going to vote for him, and then they destroy him through lawfare. But if that doesn't work, if all the court cases and the 91 charges and all that doesn't work, then they have this. And I've seen this story on multiple outlets in the last few weeks about Joe Biden declaring a, quote, climate emergency because it's hot outside. Now, all this stuff about the climate change in the last year and the increased temperatures and all this, there are a lot of scientists who talk about you remember the volcano that exploded under the ocean and created the tsunami warnings I can't remember when it was several months ago. In Tonga, it was very close to Tonga, and then they had on both sides of the Pacific tsunami warnings, even in California and Hawaii and Alaska. This volcanic explosion, I mean, typically when you have this kind of increase, it is because of volcanic activity. This volcanic explosion was larger than Krakatoa, I believe. So all that aside, I'm not going to get down that rabbit hole. But it's been hot this year, and we've had some strange storms everywhere. And last year we didn't have this. All of a sudden this year we do. Isn't that interesting? What kind of Bill Gates weather machine they turned on? Regardless, the world is pushing Joe Biden to declare a climate emergency. Now, I'd seen this story about 2 or 3 weeks ago. There's a story in the Guardian, an op-ed, quote, Joe Biden must declare a climate emergency, and he must do so now. And it talks about, how hot it is and how, the wildfires are increasing and all this. And then, again, that was 2 or 3 weeks ago. I see a story today. Joe Biden is, quote, close to declaring a climate emergency. And with this climate emergency, so for those of you who don't understand, when the president declares an emergency, that is sort of a suspension of law. It can be a suspension of rights. And so when we had COVID, the states were able, that was an emergency, and the states were able to suspend normal election laws and start just mailing out ballots to anybody who ever lived at the state in the state to their old addresses. Now, obviously, this is that opens up an election for fraud. Well, now we have the potential climate emergency. And with this, as they say in the headline here, this would allow Joe Biden to ration gasoline, electricity, and food, particularly meat. Because obviously, cow farts are worse than Hitler. So if the Donald Trump indictments don't work, we can have a climate emergency. And look, you can't drive anywhere because that's gasoline. That's bad. And there's no gas available. I mean, gasoline's already up to almost $4 here in Nashville. Electricity, I will say this about the electricity. I've never experienced so many blackouts than I have in the last year. Like a storm comes through and we're blacked out for days. And not just here, but if I go to another city, it happens. So something's going on with that too. And it's not, again, this isn't like a light switch that just flips on and off. Like you would expect it to get progressively worse over years. So it's not just crumbling infrastructure. And then the meat thing, as we talked about in the old podcast, Klaus Schwab says, you will eat the bugs and you will own the nothing. So be looking for that, the potential climate emergency because it's hot outside. And we're having storms. And there's a wildfire in Maui. But really what that's for, it's not about the climate. Because the electric vehicles don't do it. I mean, think about the electric vehicles themselves. You have to have more we have to add a ton of electricity to the electric grid in order to power all these electric vehicles. And on top of that, the environmental destruction that's caused by the mining for the raw materials to make the batteries and to make these electric vehicles. And we're not adding, the only way you can get that much energy production in the, 7 years that they want to transition to all these electric vehicles is through fossil fuels. Well, they're not going to do that. So what's going to happen? You're going to get an electric vehicle, they're going to cut the power off, and you're going to own nothing and eat bugs. I mean, they write papers about it. Here's an interesting story. The historic Biden spokesperson, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, makes a surprising announcement. Now, as the press secretary, she apparently not only runs her own Twitter account, but is probably running Biden's as well, because last night she accidentally tweeted out, "Investing in America means investing in all of America. When I ran for president, I made a promise that I would leave no part of the country behind." Now, that is under the Twitter handle @PressSec, which is Karine Jean-Pierre. So she said on her own Twitter account, when I ran for president, I made a promise that I would leave no part of the country behind. So this is proof that Joe Biden is not tweeting, which isn't surprising. I mean, I'm not criticizing for that. He's an old man. I mean, he can barely get his shirt off on the beach. I mean, he can barely walk, really. But, of all the criticism of Trump, we never had that problem. We actually knew. When Donald Trump tweeted from the POTUS Twitter handle, we knew Donald Trump was actually tweeting. It wasn't some minion that he'd hired to do the dirty work for him. Now, this last story, this came to my attention, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks ago. It's a CNN story, and there are other stories similar to this. And it sort of draws you in. It's like, oh, that's really cool. And then you get to reading about it, and it's like, oh, yeah, it's like everything else. So the headline is, "A newly discovered colossal whale might be the heaviest animal ever," quote, or comma, study finds. And you look at this picture. Well, let me give you the science behind this first. So in the story it says, the partial skeleton of this new creature called Perusitis So the scientists have found this whale. I believe they found it in the Andes Mountains. These bones of this whale, and it might be the largest whale. I think it's 3 times the size of blue whale. This is all they found of the skeleton: 13 vertebrae, backbones, 4 ribs, and 1 hip bone. Now, the disingenuous scientists have not only named this thing off of 13, 17, 18 bones. They have 18 bones from this thing, and it's a very big. These are big bones. I mean, they're very large, but they have a sort of artist rendering of this thing on the CNN website, and it looks absolutely ridiculous. They're trying to make it into this sort of missing link between like when whales crawled off the land into the ocean and decided, hey, this feels nice, we'll just live here. It's got like this weird manatee flavor. It looks like a big manatee, but it's got like these tiny little T-Rex arms on the back. I'll post a picture on the website, CoachDuke.com. I'll just post it off to the right, and you can look at this Perusitus. It's got tiny T-Rex arms as like vestigial back legs, and then the front legs sort of look like that of a hippopotamus. But then the head is the most interesting part. The head looks like a lizard of some sort, and this is supposed to be like 2 or 3 times bigger than a blue whale. And they've rendered all of this. They've rendered the tail, the tiny little T-Rex arms in the back, the big hippo legs in the front, and the sort of, reptilian face off of 18 bones, 13 backbones, 4 ribs, and 1 hip bone. And this just goes to show, again, we talked about the experts earlier in the broadcast. These scientists are such liars. What they found is a big-ass whale. Guess what else they found? They found big-ass sharks. They found big-ass starfish, big sloths, big tiger. Big cats. They found all these ancient creatures are very, very similar to the creatures we have now, but they're 3 or 4 or 5, sometimes 6 or 7 times larger. Out of 18 bones, that's all they have. They have drawn up this thing and slapped it, this monstrosity, this chimera, and they have slapped it on the CNN website, a quote, news website, if you can still call them that, and are telling you that this is the missing link. This is what crawled into the ocean. First of all, how did it crawl into the ocean? Or maybe it's been there for a while because of the little legs. I don't know. And it talks about the vestigial hip bones, and this is what links whales to, some ancient ancestor with man, because they're vestigial, meaning the hip bones don't do anything. That is not true. The hip bones of the whale are essential in the mating process. When you're that big and oblong, you need the, quote, vestigial hip bones in order to insert the dork, which if you don't know what a dork is actually a whale penis, into the whale vagina. But just the gall of these people to put this big ugly thing. They have no back legs. They have no front legs. They have no facial features, no skull, no tailbones, nothing. And they slap this ugly missing link thing up here to further the idea that whales somehow evolved from land mammals that decided that living in the ocean is cool. And maybe that happened. I don't know. I wasn't there. Maybe it happened. But I can tell you this, the Perusitus certainly did not look like this. Whatever whale bones they found out in Peru, did not look like whatever CNN, some artist rendering, is telling you this creature looked like. This is not science. Again, this is mythology. Just like the gender stuff, and just like the health bullshit we've been through in the last 5 years. Like this is not science. What they're putting up. So go to my website, coachduke.com. You can see it on the right hand side. The Perusitus. My God, we listen to idiots. The experts are idiots. And the village idiots are running the world. All right, folks, that's all we have for this week. I will see you back here next Thursday on the Great Awakening with Coach Duke Lowry. My weekly column comes out on Monday morning. Check that out on CoachDuke.com. And then video series, you can find me on Rumble at Coach Duke Lowry, all one word. The Woke Wednesday series, something I'm really excited about. I hope you like it as well. Had a good time. We'll see you next week. And as always, namaste for now.